What happens when Hollywood's most beloved A-lister comes face-to-face with late-night television's most unpredictable host? You won't believe what unfolds when years of simmering tension finally explode on live television, leaving audiences stunned and social media in absolute chaos. This is the story of the most explosive confrontation in late-night television history, one that sent shockwaves through Hollywood and left careers hanging in the balance. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two titans of entertainment collide in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. The tension was palpable from the moment Brad Pitt walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage last night. What should have been a routine promotional appearance for his latest film quickly transformed into television gold, or perhaps television disaster, depending on your perspective. The audience, initially buzzing with excitement to see one of Hollywood's biggest stars, had no idea they were about to witness something that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. Kimmel, known for his sometimes abrasive interviewing style, seemed particularly charged up as Pitt settled into the guest chair. The host's opening remarks carried an edge that seasoned television watchers immediately recognized as dangerous territory. Brad. Kimmel began with that trademark smirk that has launched 1,000 controversies. You know, I've been thinking about some of the things you've said recently in other interviews, and I have to ask, do you actually believe the stuff that comes out of your mouth? Or is this all just part of the Brad Pitt brand? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Pitt, visibly taken aback by the hostile opening, maintained his composure, but his jaw tightened noticeably. I'm not sure I follow, Jimmy. Are you asking if I'm authentic? Because that's a pretty bold accusation to make right out of the gate. The audience sensed the shift immediately. This wasn't going to be the typical lighthearted celebrity banter they'd come to expect. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, clearly relishing the moment. Well, let's talk about authenticity then. You've been making the rounds talking about your new movie, your artistic journey, your personal growth. All very inspiring stuff. But some people might say there's a disconnect between the Brad Pitt, who preaches about environmental responsibility, and the Brad Pitt, who owns multiple mansions around the world. How do you reconcile that? The attack was swift and calculated, designed to put Pitt on the defensive from the very beginning. What made it particularly cutting was that Kimmel wasn't entirely wrong. Celebrities often do face criticism for preaching values they don't always perfectly embody. But the way he delivered it, with that knowing smirk and theatrical pause, made it clear this wasn't coming from a place of genuine curiosity, but rather from a desire to create conflict at Pitt's response was measured but firm. Jimmy, I think most people understand that we're all works in progress. Nobody's perfect, and I've never claimed to be. But I think there's value in trying to do better, in using whatever platform you have to encourage positive change, even if you haven't achieved perfection yourself. Isn't that better than not trying at all? Is it though? Kimmel shot back immediately, not giving Pitt a moment to breathe. Or is it just virtue signaling? I mean, you talk about climate change while flying private jets. You advocate for affordable housing while your real estate portfolio is worth more than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. Some might call that hypocrisy. The audience began to stir uncomfortably. This was crossing lines that even provocative late-night hosts usually respect. Celebrity interviews, especially promotional ones, operate on an unspoken agreement of mutual benefit. The star promotes their project, the host gets content, and everyone walks away happy. Kimmel was torching that agreement in real time. Pitt's demeanor shifted noticeably. The practiced charm that had carried him through decades of interviews began to crack, revealing something rawer underneath. Jimmy, I came here to talk about my film and maybe have some laughs with your audience. If you want to have a debate about celebrity responsibility, that's fine, but let's at least be honest about what you're doing here. This feels less like an interview and more like an ambush. An ambush? Kimmel laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Brad, you're one of the biggest movie stars on the planet. You've been doing interviews longer than some of our viewers have. Been alive. If you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe the problem isn't with the questions. The condescension in Kimmel's voice was impossible to miss. He was treating Pitt like a petulant child rather than a respected colleague, and the audience was beginning to pick up on the host's unusual aggression. What started as uncomfortable shifting in seats was evolving into audible murmurs of concern. Pitt, took a deep breath, clearly trying to regain his composure. Look, I'm happy to discuss my work, my beliefs, even my contradictions if that's where you want to go. But there's a way to have that conversation that doesn't involve attacking someone's character from the moment they sit down. What's really going on here, Jimmy? It was a direct challenge, and Kimmel's eyes lit up like he'd been waiting for exactly this moment. What's going on is that I'm tired of the sanitized celebrity interview circuit where nobody asks real questions. And everybody pretends like we're all just here to sell movie tickets. You want authenticity? Let's be authentic. Let's talk about the divorce settlement that made headlines, the custody battles, the way you've managed to rebrand every personal crisis as a journey of self-discovery. The audience gasped audibly. This was no longer uncomfortable. This was cruel. Kimmel had just weaponized some of the most painful chapters of Pitt's personal life for the sake of television drama. The cameras captured Pitt's face as the words hit him, and viewers could see the exact moment when professional courtesy died and something much more primal took its place. But this was only the beginning. As the commercial break approached, both men sat in silence, the air between them crackling with an energy that promised the second segment would be even more explosive than the first. The studio lights dimmed momentarily as producers scrambled. Behind the scenes, clearly aware that their routine celebrity interview had transformed into something far more volatile. During the break, neither Pitt nor Kimmel exchanged pleasantries, a stark departure from the usual behind-the-scenes camaraderie that keeps the entertainment machine running smoothly. Instead, they stared at each other across the desk like prize fighters waiting for the bell to ring for round two when the cameras rolled again. Kimmel's demeanor had hardened even further, as if the brief intermission had only reinforced his determination to push this confrontation to its breaking point. "Welcome back," he said to the camera, his voice carrying a false cheerfulness that fooled no one. "We're here with Brad Pitt, and we were just having a fascinating conversation about authenticity in Hollywood." The way he emphasized fascinating made it clear he was savoring every uncomfortable moment. Pitt, for his part, had used the commercial break to steel himself for what was coming. Gone was any pretense of the charming movie star persona. His posture was straighter, his jaw set, and his eyes held a warning that anyone with sense would have heeded. But Jimmy Kimmel had apparently left sense backstage along with professional courtesy. "So Brad," Kimmel continued, turning back to his guest with predatory focus, "before the break we were discussing your various transformations over the years. I'm curious about this latest version of Brad Pitt, the philosophical, spiritually awakened Brad Pitt. When exactly did that transition happen? Was it right around the time the tabloids started paying attention to your personal life? Or is that just a coincidence?" The question was a masterclass in passive-aggressive hostility, designed to suggest that Pitt's personal growth was nothing more than calculated image rehabilitation. The audience, now fully aware they were witnessing something unprecedented, sat in stunned silence. Even the most dramatic late-night moments usually maintained some veneer of entertainment value. But this felt different. This felt personal and cruel. Pitt's response came slowly, each word carefully chosen. "Jimmy, I'm trying to understand what you're hoping to accomplish here. If you have something specific you want to say to me, just say it. This passive-aggressive routine is beneath both of us." Kimmel's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully goaded their opponent into dropping their guard. "Passive-aggressive? Brad, I'm being about as direct as television allows. I'm asking why the public should buy into this latest version of you when you've been through so many different personas over the years. The heartthrob, the serious actor, the humanitarian, the family man, the bachelor, the environmentalist. It's like you're a different person every time you need to sell something new." The attack was surgical in its precision, targeting not just Pitt's current public image, but his entire career trajectory. It suggested that everything about his public persona was calculated artifice, that there was no authentic Brad Pitt beneath all the carefully constructed images. For a man who had spent decades building one of Hollywood's most respected careers, it was about as insulting as professionally possible. But Pitt didn't explode. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more intimate register that somehow made his words more menacing than if he had shouted. "You know what, Jimmy? You're right. I have been different people at different times in my life. Most adults do that. It's called growth. But let me ask you something. What's your excuse for being the same petty, small-minded person you were 20 years ago? The counterattack landed like a physical blow. Kimmel's smug expression faltered for just a moment, revealing something vulnerable underneath before his defensive mechanisms kicked in. Small-minded? That's rich coming from someone who thinks making movies about important topics absolves him of actually having to live by the values he preaches on screen. At least I try. Pitt shot back, his composure finally beginning to crack. At least, I use whatever influence I have to try to make things better instead of sitting behind a desk every night making jokes about other people's pain. When's the last time you did anything meaningful with your platform besides tear down people who are actually trying to contribute something positive to the world? The accusation hit its target perfectly. Kimmel's entire career was built on commentary and criticism, on being the voice that punctured the pretensions of others. To have that role challenged, to be called out as essentially parasitic, struck at the very foundation of his professional identity. His response was swift and vicious. Contribute something positive. Kimmel's voice rose, abandoning any pretense of television civility. Brad, you make movies for a living. You pretend to be other people in front of cameras. That's your job. Everything else, the charity work, the political statements, the environmental advocacy, that's just public relations designed to make you feel better about being part of an industry that exists to distract people from their real problems. The brutality of the statement left the audience genuinely gasping. This wasn't just professional disagreement anymore. This was one person attempting to strip away everything another person had built their sense of purpose around. Kimmel had essentially accused Pitt of being a fraud whose entire post-Hollywood humanitarian identity was nothing more than elaborate guilt management. Pitt's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, anger, and finally something cold and calculating that hadn't been there before. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. You know what the difference is between us, Jimmy? When I screw up, when I make mistakes, when I fall short of my ideals, it's front-page news around the world. Every failure, every moment of hypocrisy, every time I don't live up to the standards I set for myself gets dissected by millions of people. And you know what? I accept that. That's the price of the platform I have. He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. But you get to sit here every night, safe behind your desk, taking shots at people who are actually in the arena trying to do something, anything, to make a difference. You've built your entire career on being a critic, on pointing out other people's flaws and contradictions, but what have you actually risked? What have you put on the line? What criticism do you face for anything other than not being funny enough? The role reversal was complete. Suddenly, Kimmel was the one under attack, forced to defend a career built on commentary rather than action. But instead of backing down or acknowledging the validity of Pitt's points, he doubled down with a cruelty that shocked even veteran television watchers. You want to know what I've risked? Kimmel's voice was now openly hostile, all pretense of entertainment abandoned. I've risked telling the truth about people like you. People who think that because they're famous, because they're wealthy, because they're beautiful, they somehow have more insight into how the world should work than the rest of us. You live in a bubble, Brad. You've lived in a bubble so long. You've forgotten what reality looks like for normal people. The personal nature of the attack was breathtaking. This was no longer about professional differences or even philosophical disagreements. This was one person attempting to demolish another's entire worldview and sense of self-worth on live television. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing but unable to look away. But if Kimmel thought he had delivered a knockout blow, he had seriously underestimated his opponent. Pitt's response, when it came, was delivered with the kind of controlled fury that only comes from years of media training and decades of keeping one's real thoughts carefully guarded. You want to talk about bubbles, Jimmy? Pitt's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any shout could have managed. Let me tell you about bubbles. You sit in this studio every night, surrounded by writers who laugh at your jokes, producers who tell you you're brilliant, and an audience that applauds on cue. You've convinced yourself that making fun of other people's efforts to do something meaningful makes you some kind of truth teller, some kind of voice of the people. The words hung in the air like poison, each one carefully chosen to maximum effect. Pitt leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Kimmel's face. But here's what you don't seem to understand. Criticism without action isn't wisdom, it's cowardice. It's easy to sit here and tear down everything and everyone around you. It takes no courage, no risk, no actual commitment to anything beyond your own sense of superiority. Kimmel tried to interrupt, but Pitt held up a hand, his authority in that moment absolute. The studio had fallen so silent that the hum of the cameras seemed deafening. I'm not finished. You accused me of living in a bubble, of being disconnected from reality. Maybe you're right about some of that. But at least when I mess up, when I fall short, when I make mistakes, I'm trying to do something. I'm putting myself out there, taking real risks, facing real consequences. What do you do besides judge everyone else from the safety of your little late-night kingdom? The attack was devastating in its precision, striking at every insecurity a career built on commentary must carry. But Pitt wasn't done. Years of pent-up frustration with hostile interviews, invasive media coverage, and the constant scrutiny that came with his level of fame seemed to pour out all at once. You talk about normal people, about reality? Jimmy, when was the last time you had a conversation with someone who wasn't paid to be there? When was the last time you faced genuine criticism for anything you've said or done? You've built your entire identity around being the guy who tells it like it is. But what you really are is a professional cynic who's made millions convincing people that caring about anything is naive. Kimmel's face had gone through several shades of red during this monologue, his usual composure completely shattered. When he finally found his voice, it came out as a snarl. You don't get to lecture me about authenticity, Brad. You don't get to sit there and pretend you're some kind of noble crusader when everyone knows this is all just damage control for a life that fell apart in public. The charitable Brad, the environmentalist Brad, the spiritual Brad, it's all just an expensive therapy session that the rest of us have to watch. It was the cruelest thing Kimmel had said yet, reducing Pitt's personal growth and humanitarian efforts to nothing more than public rehabilitation for past mistakes. The accusation that his entire evolution as a person was performative, designed to rehabilitate his image rather than reflecting genuine change, was designed to be a kill shot. But instead of destroying Pitt, it seemed to liberate him. Something shifted in his demeanor, as if Kimmel's willingness to go that low had freed him from any obligation to maintain civility. When he spoke again, his voice carried a finality that everyone in the studio recognized. You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right about one thing. My life did fall apart in public. And yes, some of the work I've done since then has been about trying to become a better person, trying to learn from my mistakes, trying to use whatever platform I have to do something positive in the world. But here's the difference between us. When my life fell apart, I didn't respond by trying to tear down everyone around me. Pitt stood up slowly, his decision clearly made. The audience held its collective breath, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented in television history. I came here tonight to talk about a movie, to maybe have some laughs, to give your audience a good time. Instead, you've spent the last 20 minutes trying to destroy everything I've worked to build, not because it serves your audience, not because it makes for good television, but because it makes you feel powerful. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that he had pushed things too far, tried to regain control of the situation. Brad, come on, this is what we do here. This is entertainment. You can't just entertainment. Pitt's voice cut through Kimmel's attempt at damage control like a blade. Jimmy, there's nothing entertaining about watching someone try to humiliate another person for sport. There's nothing funny about using someone's personal struggles as material for your monologue. What you've done here tonight isn't entertainment, it's cruelty. The word cruelty hung in the air like an indictment. The audience, many of whom had initially been excited to see their favorite late-night host take on a major celebrity, now seemed uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. The energy in the room had shifted completely, and not in Kimmel's favor. Pitt began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. You asked me about authenticity earlier. Here's some authenticity for you. I don't have to sit here and let you use my life as your entertainment. I don't have to pretend that what you're doing is journalism or comedy or anything other than what it actually is. Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation, his voice taking on a pleading quality that was completely at odds with his earlier aggression. Brad, look, maybe we got a little heated here, but that's good television. People want to see real conversations, real emotions, real emotions. Pitt's laugh was hollow and bitter. Jimmy, the only real emotion I'm feeling right now is pity. Pity for someone who's so desperate to feel relevant that he's willing to destroy a guest on his own show. Pity for someone who thinks that being cruel makes him brave. The microphone came off completely, and Pitt set it down on the coffee table with deliberate care. You want to know what the difference is between someone who's actually confident and someone who's just trying to convince themselves they are? Confident people don't need to tear others down to feel good about themselves. Kimmel sat frozen behind his desk, clearly realizing that he had lost control of the situation entirely, but unable to figure out how to regain it. His usual arsenal of jokes and deflections seemed pathetically inadequate for the moment he had created. The cameras captured every second of his discomfort, every moment of uncertainty as he watched his interview completely implode. Pitt straightened his jacket and looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience both in the studio and at home. To everyone watching tonight, I apologize that you had to see this. You tuned in expecting entertainment, and instead you got to watch someone try to make themselves feel important by tearing down a guest on their own show. You deserved better. Then, he turned back to Kimmel one final time, his voice carrying a weight that made clear this was his final statement on the matter. And Jimmy, I hope someday you figure out the difference between being provocative and being cruel, between asking tough questions and launching personal attacks, between being a host and being a bully. Until then, I feel sorry for every guest who has to sit in this chair after me. With that, Brad Pitt walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, leaving behind a stunned studio audience, a floundering host, and what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked about moments in late night television history. The cameras continued to roll as Kimmel sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that his attempt to create viral television had backfired spectacularly. The sound of Pitt's footsteps echoing through the studio was the only noise as America watched one of Hollywood's biggest stars refuse to play along with a game that had gone too far. In that moment, the power dynamic that usually governs celebrity interviews had been completely reversed, and everyone knew it today as the show cut to an unscheduled commercial break. The damage was already done. Social media exploded within minutes, with clips of the confrontation spreading faster than wildfire. And the consensus was clear. Jimmy Kimmel had crossed a line that should never be crossed, and Brad Pitt had handled it with a dignity that made the host's behavior look even worse by comparison.